It was only a matter of time before I had my own experience, I guess. You only get to chronicle things like this for so long before they decide to come and say hi. Yesterday they rolled out the welcome wagon in spectacular fashion. It all started with the laziness of the shift before me. I came in around 6 p.m. to start my shift and noticed a large white envelope at the reception desk. I asked Tyler, the guy who works the day shift, how long that had been sitting there. He shrugged and said they had brought it in around noon. When I asked why he hadn't bothered to get it delivered, he said he had been busy. Given the indent in the chair, I doubted he had left the desk all day. He said his goodbyes and headed out, and I sat down to start my own work for the night. I promptly forgot about the envelope until around midnight, when I got a call that started all of this. The second I heard the oh-so-docer tones of head nurse Finley from 5 East, I knew this wouldn't be a fun conversation. Do you have a legal envelope at your desk? Yeah, day shift left it here and never delivered it. And when were you planning to deliver it? I could almost hear her biting the inside of her cheek as she talked to me. My apologies, ma'am. I'm still waiting to receive a break. When someone comes to relieve me for a few minutes, I'll bring it right up there to you. Those papers are critical, and I needed them at the start of my shift, not 6 hours later. Have someone bring them up to me immediately, or I'll be drafting a complaint to your supervisor. That got my attention. My supervisor, Helen, pretty well left the night shift alone. Day shift, however, was almost constantly subjected to her micromanaging. If I gave her a reason to, I'm sure she'd be happy to add me to her list of things to do. So I turned on my best customer service voice and assured the charge nurse that I would have her envelope there within the hour. She hung up on me, and I looked up to see Carl wandering by about that time. Hey, Carl, you got a minute to take this up to 5 East? Sorry, man, Carl said. I'm on a tight schedule tonight. I need to get up to 3 North before 3 o'clock and handle some kind of lock malfunction for them. Okay, well, could you stand here for 5 minutes while I do it? I'll be right up and down. Won't take me more than a couple of minutes. That got Carl's attention. You could tell the poor guy had been running his legs off all night. Hospital security never seemed to stop after 8 o'clock, and the thought of taking it easy for 5 to 10 minutes appealed to him. He nodded, telling me to go ahead as he took a load off, and I grabbed the envelope and headed for the elevators. The elevators in the lobby are brand new. They don't hitch, they don't shake, and they can generally be counted on to take you from the ground floor to the 5th floor, without smelling like burning rubber bands or threatening to drop you to your death. They were installed about 5 years ago with some budget money from the state, and they're a vast improvement on the ones that we had before. Or so I've been told. They're well maintained, too. All the lights work, the handrails are clean, and when you push the buttons, they light up, letting you know exactly where they're taking you. I walked past these and turned down a nearby corridor to find the staff elevators. If you've never worked in a hospital, you might not be aware of this. The administration doesn't like it when staff use the guest elevators. It leads guests to ask them questions that some of them are more than happy to answer, whether they should or not. It also leads staff to push patients in gurneys onto elevators, which sometimes frightens the guests. This is, of course, gone over very carefully in our yearly training, so we all know not to use the nice new guest elevators. The staff elevators are not as nice. The lights flicker, they smell like they're constantly about to break, and they're notorious for getting stuck between floors. According to maintenance, they hadn't sized the elevator shafts right when they built the 4th and 5th floor. This leads to some problems sometimes, and Mark says that not a week goes by when he doesn't get at least one call to the switchboard about someone being stuck in the elevators. In fact, he had a hilarious story about a doctor who cried on the emergency phone for close to 3 hours while he was stuck inside one of those elevators. He said the poor guy was talking about things with claws, disembodied laughing, and weird noises coming from inside and outside the elevator. Mark always laughed it off as weird, frightening paranoia, and until today, I'd laughed right along with him. The trip up in the staff elevators was uneventful. The wheels chugged, the lights flickered a little when they passed 3 and 4, but when they dinged drunkenly to let me out on the 5th floor, only a minute and a half had passed. I walked around the corner to 5 North, and it seemed that luck was with me. The charge nurse was just stepping into the back to get a cup of coffee, and I handed the envelope to one of her subordinates as I asked if she would mind passing it off to her. She smiled and said that she would, advising that I get moving before the old battle axe returned and found me here. I climbed happily back into the staff elevator, thinking I had dodged a bullet. When I hit the big red button on the elevator, I thought nothing more exciting than a ride down was about to happen. I had no idea what was in store for me. When the elevator ground to a halt between floor 3 and 4, I loosed a growling cry of rage. In frustration, I smashed at the buttons, but the box did little but click and grind as it stuck tight in the shaft. I was going to have to call Mark so David could come get me unstuck. I picked up the emergency phone inside the little box at the bottom of the button pad and expected to hear it click as it rang in the control room. Instead, it just hung there, silently. I hung it back up and picked it back up again, expecting a delay in the line, but there was still silence. I figured I'd disconnected the line when the elevator got stuck, and when I hung the phone back up, I thought guiltily about how Carl would be a little late for his checks. Without the ability to let anyone know, I could be stuck here for quite some time. I paced around the elevator like a mouse stuck in a shoebox. I hated confined places. I wasn't claustrophobic, but I hated the feeling of being stuck. The little box felt like a coffin the longer I sat in it, and looking at my watch didn't help matters. At some point, it had stopped, and I hadn't noticed. It informed me that only about 4 minutes had passed since I left the desk. But that couldn't be right. I'd been stuck in this elevator longer than that. I tried the phone again, but it was still dead, and I hung it up a little harder than I strictly needed to. As I sat in the corner of the elevator, feeling the cold metal against my back, it sounded like something was tapping against the outside. Well, of course, I could hear tapping, I told myself. The elevator was sitting in a chute, probably trying to get itself to work again. If nothing else, it was ticking as it got comfortable in the slightly too small chute. It sounded different than that, though. This sounded different than the ticking of an elevator getting comfortable, and more like the tapping of fingers on glass. I tried to put it out of my mind, telling myself I was being silly, but as I leaned my head back against the metal box, the tapping became harder and harder to ignore. It was almost rhythmic. 2 beats, 3 beats, 2 beats again, on the outside of the metal box. It reminded me of someone just absent-mindedly tapping on their desk, maybe working out a beat in their head as they put words to it. It had no real rhythm, and the longer I listened to it, the less sure I was that it was normal elevator noise. Was somebody out there? They couldn't be, could they? That was why the elevator got stuck, after all. The space was too small. I'd been thinking too loudly about it, and missed the point where the tapping had stopped. I sat in a pregnant silence for a count of 30, cocking my head as I listened and waited for the tapping to begin again. When the elevator suddenly shook like it had been kicked by a horse, I felt like I might need a new pair of pants when all this was over. I tried to get a hold of myself. It was just maintenance, working on the elevator after all. Someone had noticed that the elevator wasn't working, and they were trying to get it running again. I was sure that David was in the motor room, trying to figure out how much pressure to put on the winch to get the cart to move without ripping it to shreds. He told me one night that it was basically all he could do, just exert a little more force on the winch and hope that he didn't pulp some poor staffer. OSHA would likely have a field day with it, but I'm just doing what maintenance told me to do, he had said. When it lurched again, I breathed a sigh of relief when it started to go down. I grabbed the rails, however, as the feeling of gravity left the car. I was suddenly plummeting down like a comet. The buttons flashed, dinging a hellish chorus as I shook and clung to the wall. As I fell, I watched the numbers tick down until they were finally just spinning in place, indecipherable jargon that meant nothing. When the screeching returned, I no longer had any illusions that it was just the box grinding against the walls. The doors began to rock, and the lights overhead flashed like a funhouse ride. Something began to peel the doors open, its long black claws making the steel slab groan in agony. As it slid open, I could see something huge push its head into the space. It had a face like a dragon, its eyes burning as it stared at me through the gap. Behind it, I could see that I was falling through a red and black hellscape. The skies cried fire as the ground came up to swallow me, but I didn't think smashing into the earth was the worst outcome in this case. As it opened its mouth, I saw fire kindle in its throat. The bloom of red began to grow, and I could feel the heat as it built in that small place. I covered my face with my arms, praying for any protection from my frail body that it could grant. Then the cheery ding filled the car, and I was looking at the dim illumination from the staff hallway by night. A woman was stepping in, a cup of coffee in one hand and a phone in the other, and she stopped as she saw me. She looked confused, asking if I was okay, but as the doors began to close, I shot through them like a lunatic and went running from the elevator like the devil himself was chasing me. Carl smiled and commented that I'd only been gone about 5 minutes and must have made pretty good time. His face fell when he got a good look at me, and he turned white as I told him what had happened. "Maybe David really did see something in the stairwell," he whispered, and all I could do was nod somberly. I sat there for the rest of my shift, but I didn't get any work done. I haven't slept well in 3 days. My nightmares plagued by the images I saw in that elevator. I've stumbled onto the hospital's radar, and as little as I want to find out what it has in store for me, I'll be back tomorrow night for more. The money's nice, but what I really crave is the tales that come from the lips of the recently terrified. There may be a book somewhere in these stories. My suffering and the suffering of others should be worth something, after all. The doctor, one of the newer plastic surgeons at Cashmere Hospital, looked a little sheepish as he approached my desk. I had only seen him a few times, and he had never spoken to me directly. He was a vain fella, in the same vein as a few of the other hotshot docs around the ER, but today he looked rattled. His hair was unkempt, his clothes looked dirty, and he was glancing around in that way that made me think he might be followed. "Are you the one who collects the stories?" he asked. I looked around, not sure if he was hiding from someone, before telling him that I was. "Carl said you'd understand. I don't know what happened to me, but he told me that you might be able to help me make sense of it. I know you're at work, but do you have a minute to talk?" It was currently about 10 o'clock, and I was in the middle of a lull in activity. The real work wouldn't be possible until they called for visitors to leave, so I pushed out a chair and pulled out a notepad. I'd started carrying it religiously, the stories becoming habitual, and I wanted to get all the information while it was fresh. His name was Dr. Gary Long, and he'd experienced something that I had only heard about once before. The more he talked, the more I realized that he was talking about the creatures that had taken up residence in the forbidden corridor over the East Wing record mezzanine. I've only been working at Cashmere for a couple of months, but I'd heard all the rumors. Dr. Logan still tells people about what happened to him in the elevator. People talk about the ghost girl in the South Wing that jumps from the 5th-story balcony. And everyone, nurses and doctors alike, know that if you're in the OR too late, you might run into Shaky Leg Mary. I listened, but privately I thought they were nothing but stories. It was just talk. Every hospital has them, but Cashmere Hospital has a bit of a reputation. Even in med school, the students knew about the weirdness that surrounded the hospital, and when my friends heard I'd accepted a job offer there, they joked that I was going to get taken away by a ghost one night. Well, I don't think it was a ghost that tried to get me. Ghosts don't do what this thing did. It was late when I got done with my case. I dressed out and was leaving to get my car from the garage. This sounds silly, but I always park my car at the bottom of the parking lot. It's a 2021 Mercedes that I'm still likely going to be paying for when I'm 40, but doctors are expected to maintain a certain air of affluence. Fancy watches, big houses, shiny cars, it all gives off the illusion of wealth, while most of us are drowning in student loans or credit card debts. The car was a frivolity that I couldn't really afford, but I was trying and mostly succeeding at keeping my head above water. So when I took the elevator down to the 5th floor basement of the car park and found nothing but empty spots, I was shocked. I had parked it in the 3rd spot on the left side, and now it was gone. There were no other cars down there either, so I could only assume that someone had either stolen it or it had been towed for some reason. I was grumbling when I climbed back into the elevator, but I felt confident that this could be solved in short order. If it had been stolen, then my insurance would get me a rental car and the police would find it. The car was insured for quite a lot, and I had little doubt that the premiums would buy me another one if it had been taken. If the hospital had my car towed, then they would get me a rental car and get the impound lot to bring my damn car back. When the elevator didn't move after I jabbed the buttons, my anger flared. I slapped at the buttons, but nothing happened. I picked up the phone and tried to call the switchboard, but there was no tone. The door didn't close either, which didn't seem weird until I thought about it. They just stayed open, and finally I threw the phone at the bank of lit-up buttons and decided to walk out of the garage and find someone to yell at. It had been a long day, and I was tired, and all this bullcrap was really starting to make me mad. I started walking towards the ramp then, and if I'd known what would happen later, I think I'd have just stayed in the elevator. The next floor up was empty too, and I wondered how late it was before my watch told me it was barely 9. Most of the other employees were probably just lazy and didn't want to drive all the way back up. They didn't care if people dinged their cars, and I figured I would see more cars as I went up. It was comfortable enough down here, the concrete box creating a cave of sorts, and the fluorescents overhead hummed with insectile good cheer. Other than the hum, my footfalls seemed to be the only noise. The constant tock, tock, tock of my sneakers was monotonous, but it was also a little nice to know that I hadn't just gone deaf. There really wasn't any other sound down there, and as I came to the 3rd floor, I was surprised that there still wasn't any windows to the outside. The first 2 levels had been basements, but surely this one should be at ground level, right? This floor was when I started to notice the plants as well. They were palmettos, I think, and they sprouted up from the concrete in places. The fronds looked pokey, and I really didn't want to touch them and find out. I wondered why maintenance or groundskeeping hadn't done something about them, but it was really none of my business. They were in the corners and out of the way, and they weren't hurting anything. The Georgia flora has always been a bit invasive sometimes, and seeing plants in a man-made structure wasn't anything uncommon. That was the first time I felt something watching me, too. I was coming up the ramp and onto the 2nd floor when I heard something scrub against the concrete. It was a low sound, like fingernails, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The concrete parking structure was still empty, and it was becoming odd that I hadn't seen any cars or people. A dozen others, nurses and techs, had been with me in the surgery, and to see neither them or their vehicles here was strange. I was coming to the level just beneath the entrance ramp. Why hadn't I seen anyone yet? As the phantom eyes bored twin holes into my shoulder blades, I picked up the pace. I wanted to be out of here. My anger was beginning to subside as the creeping chill of fear sent icy fingers through it. The next floor should have definitely been at ground level, but it was the same bland box that the others had been. There were no cars, no people, but the plants had gotten thicker. They were looking more like jungle plants now, and the cool cave was becoming a little humid. I saw vines hanging from the ceiling, and they seemed to be coming right out of the concrete. Why hadn't I ever noticed any of this before? Its presence did little to soothe me, and when I heard a crunch from behind me, I quickened my pace. I could still hear that low noise coming from behind me. I wasn't as alone as I thought. It felt like something was stalking me, and as I ran up the next ramp, I almost cried out when it was more of the same. I was running now, my feet carrying me onward as my brain began to scream that we were trapped. The plants were becoming more dense, growing up out of the floor, and the concrete seemed to be giving way to dirt in places. I was running now, my feet carrying me onward as my brain began to scream at me that we were trapped. I stumbled, but I caught myself before I fell and glanced back to make sure that nothing was chasing me. I don't know how, but I knew that if I fell, that would be the end of me. I'd gone higher than the parking deck could possibly be, 5 floors higher than the roof, when the lights suddenly went out. I don't mean that the lights flickered. I don't mean they just sort of dimmed. I mean that suddenly I was something akin to blind. As I stood still in the blackness, I could hear them again. They sounded like animals, walking around on all fours as their claws scraped across the ground. I had thought there was only one of them, but the longer I listened, the more I thought it might be 2 or 3 or as many as 6. They were searching for me, stalking me through the murk, and I didn't dare move. Something in the instinctual part of my brain told me that if I moved, they'd know where I was. It told me to stand as still as I could and not to make a sound as they hunted for me. They searched, they sniffed, but eventually I heard them moving away, and that was when I made my escape. I ran like my life depended on it, and maybe it did. They heard me sooner than I would have thought and tore off in my general direction. The layout of the parking structure was pretty uniform, and I knew that if I just kept moving in a circle, I could get to the next floor. Something in me screamed that if I could get out of here, that if I could get free of whatever loop I was in, that I could lose the creatures and be done with this madness. Their claws sounded huge as they ate up the ground. They made little huffing noises as they ran, and I couldn't imagine what they might look like. I think I settled on a pack of panthers that had come to get me, and when I suddenly ran into a concrete wall, I just knew they were about to rip me to shreds. It turned out to be for the best, however. As I lay there trying to see if my nose was broken, something hit the wall I had run into with a sound that was loud and angry. It hit it hard enough to send concrete chips cascading over me, and I put a hand over my mouth as I lay completely silent on the dusty concrete. It picked itself up and shook off whatever damage the wall had done to it before snuffling the air soupily. It was looking for me, and I did not want to be found. I could feel its bulk as it came close, smell the rancid meat that must lay beneath those claws, and I hoped that it couldn't hear me trembling. I expected that every breath would be my last, and the thought that I would die as I took shallow half-breaths was depressing. Some indeterminate amount of time later, the creature moved away, and I got up as quietly as I could and tiptoed for the wall. I'd misjudged the circle I was making, and when I found the edge, I headed up the ramp and kept climbing. Something was different now. I could feel it, and when my light-deprived eyes began to adjust to the intrusion of light, I knew I was getting close to the surface. As my hopes came back, I started running again, and that's when I heard them behind me. I came up and saw the crossbar, a little booth that told me the front of the parking deck was in sight. I put on a burst of speed, and when I ducked under the arm, I heard something's claws rake across the wood. I fell onto the asphalt and looked back in time to see a solid black creature with a head like a spade. Its body looked like it was covered in scales instead of fur, and the teeth that hung from that mouth looked painfully big. It had no eyes, but it pointed its spade-shaped head in my direction and seemed to know where I was. Despite the small burn of the moon and the distant islands of the security lights, the creature was still unwilling to come out to get me. It slunk back into the parking structure, and I sighed in relief. I screamed in surprise when I heard footsteps coming towards me, but it was just Carl. He'd been smoking by the parking deck, and when he heard me running out, he came to investigate. I told him about the creature, and he only shrugged like this was just one more thing on his plate. He offered to go get my car for me, and when I asked him if he wasn't afraid of the things down there, he said it was nothing new. "Stuff like this happens all the time," he said, and he told me to go wait for him in the front lobby. "There's a guy there who I think will want to talk to you. I have a feeling he knows just about what you're talking about." The Mercedes in question came rolling up at that point, and Dr. Long seemed relieved. I finished my notes, but I could feel him staring in much the same way he had described the creature staring at him. "So, have you ever heard of anything like this before?" "Yeah, it's not the first time. If it happens again, just stay in the elevator until it stops. The hospital is like a strange kind of waiting room all its own. Sometimes you slip into places that you aren't prepared for, and it's best to just wait until reality reasserts itself. I don't think I'll be in the parking structure again. I'll take my chances in staff parking. A few dings on the door is a small price to pay for peace of mind." He thanked me before leaving, and I transcribed his notes into the PDF I was keeping for weird things that happened around here. Eventually, we all slip into that strange other room just beyond the waiting room, and if you're lucky, you get to slip back out again too. Dr. Long was lucky, but he may not get lucky a second time. Poor David. He just can't seem to catch a break. It was a pretty bad winter this year. Aside from the generators needing to pick up a few times, the hospital came to work one morning and found the hot water off. This caused quite a lot of problems, as you can imagine, since patients like to take hot showers and doctors like to wash their hands in water scalding enough to make their skin blister. David was called in to fix the problem, since his counterpart was in bed with the flu. David had just gotten home, just started getting ready for bed, in fact, but he put his overalls back on and came to see if he could fix the problem. What he found was the last thing he expected. He told me all this as he sat at the desk and drank hot chocolate with both hands. He had to hold the cup in two hands because they were shaking so badly. David's been doing this job since before I got here. He's no stranger to the oddities that happen in this hospital. Even so, he said this was probably one of the hardest things he's ever seen. "I've never seen anything like this during the day. Some weird stuff goes on around here. You know that as much as anybody. But it usually happens at night. The weird stuff happening during the day, that's new. The idea that it could happen at any time really weirds me out." He had started to ramble a bit, not really making much sense, and I asked him if he felt comfortable talking about it. He said he wouldn't have come to talk to me if he didn't, and leaned right into the story about the boiler man. "This place is old, you know that much, but I don't think you know how old some of this place is. There are parts of this place that were built in the 70s, but there are other parts that go back all the way to the 30s. I started this job in 93, probably just about the time you stopped crapping in your diapers. And I remember when the undercellar had these big boilers. They used to heat the whole hospital. They were ancient when I got here, and they changed them out about 5 years after I started. They were constantly going out. They were unreliable as all get out, I was glad to see them go. Not just because they needed constant work, but because of the way I always felt when I was in that basement. I've seen some spooky places around here, but that basement is one of the spookiest. Sometimes you'd be working down there, working on the water heater, or the boiler, or the furnace, and it would sound like somebody dropped a pipe. The basement under the hospital's huge, but you could hear someone drop a pipe down there from a long way back. Other times it sounded like somebody yelling, somebody really screaming down there. But when you went to look, there was nobody there. I asked some of the other guys about it, and they all told me that it sounded like I'd run into the Boiler Man. I asked them who the Boiler Man was. They all started grinning and asked how I hadn't heard about the Boiler Man yet. I was just a kid, a little younger than you actually, and when I said I never heard of him, they told me the whole story. Sometime back in the 30s or 40s, there was a maintenance guy who was responsible for the boilers and the furnaces down there. The hospital was a little smaller then, but it still needed heat and hot water to operate. So that was this fella's whole job. Day in, day out, all he did was work in the basement and mind the boilers and the furnaces. Got to the point that he got to be kind of a hospital spook, and some people claim that he never left at all. Some of the other maintenance guys said he had a cot down there, and he just slept down there next to the boilers and kept the place running all day and night. Well, he did, till the place took care of him in the worst way possible. They say that one winter there was a terrible noise from the basement. People went to the stairwell that led down, and all you could see was smoke and steam boiling up out of the guts of the place. The other maintenance guys went down there to see what had happened, and they found that one of the boilers had fallen over and taken out the one next to it. They had taken out 3 boilers and a furnace, to be specific, before the wall had stopped its destructive rampage. The more they looked, though, the more they realized that that wasn't all it had taken out. As they looked for the Boiler Man, they started getting nervous when they couldn't find him. Had he been down there when the whole place blew? Had he taken the day off, maybe? As the emergency crews started clearing stuff away, they found the poor guy smashed between 2 boilers. He'd been trying to stop it from falling, and they had returned the favor by smashing him flat. He was burned almost beyond recognition, and they found that some of the rumors about him had been true. There was a little alcove with a cot and a bookcase, a little hot plate, and some food for his dinner. He'd been living down in the basement, and it appeared that it had been the death of him. That was the way I heard it, at least. And any time there was a weird noise down in the basement, the other maintenance guys just said, "It must be the Boiler Man." I'd never really believed in him, not right on top. I've seen enough weird stuff in this hospital to make me not question too much of the other spooky stuff that happens. That being said, I'd never seen any evidence of the Boiler Man in the almost 30 years I've been here. I've seen the ghost girl. I've heard enough people talk about Shaky Leg Mary that I have to believe it. I've checked the phones up on the 3rd floor for your buddy Mark enough times to know that something's going on up there. But the Boiler Man, that was never something I put a lot of stock into. At least, till this morning. So the new boilers are all on a switch. They're like Christmas lights. If one of them goes out, they all goes out. It's an interesting system, and it'd be a pain in the ass if it weren't for the fact that the computer that's down there can pinpoint exactly which one is messing up the system. It doesn't happen very often. They've got that system pretty tight, but there's about 15 of them down there, and 2 of them were the culprits this morning. So I took my toolbox, checked the computer, and pinpointed the 2 that were giving us trouble. I got to work on the first one, and it wasn't a real hard fix. Some rats probably got into the wiring. They usually look for somewhere warm to sleep when it's cold. So I started fixing the wires so I could get home and get some sleep before I gotta come back tonight. I'm working on the circuit when suddenly I hear something hit the ground towards the back of the basement. It was like a big metal pipe being dropped, real loud. It rattled all through the basement, and I jumped about a foot and hit my head on the underside of the boiler. I probably taught the boiler man some new words that day, but the bastard had it coming. I listened real close, trying to figure out what the noise was, but after a few minutes, I just chalked it up to rats and got back to work. I've almost got it hooked up and ready to flip back on when I hear another pipe hit the ground. This one's a lot closer, maybe next row over, and I holler out to make sure somebody's not down there playing games. I would have thought maybe it was the daytime maintenance guy, Lou. He's a bit of a trickster, but I heard the way he was snorting when I called him on the phone, and I know he's laid up in bed with the flu. I got up and looked around with my flashlight a little, but I couldn't see anybody. It was just me and a lot of quiet old machinery. I closed up the boiler and went to check the computer. Wouldn't you know it, I only had one left to go. I turned back to find the next one, and that's when the lights went out. That ain't really nothing new. You'd be surprised how often the lights go out in the basement. I figured it was the same problem that probably tripped those boilers, and just kind of got back to work. I took my flashlight out so I could see to work and expected that the power would come back on about the time I got done. If there's one thing you can count on down here, it's that the power's gonna come back on at the least opportune time. So, I set to work on the next one, and God almighty, is this thing screwed up. If it was rats, they had really been at this one. But I kinda doubted that vermin had anything to do with it. It looked like someone had been trying to take it apart. The front panels were off, and some of the fuses and wires were sitting on the floor. The whole thing was a took-apart mess, and as I started putting it back together, I got that feeling I always got when I worked down here. The feeling of being watched. That feeling of something on the ceiling looking down at me. I looked up a few times, shining my flashlight around as I tried to find the source of it. I didn't see nothing, but as I worked, I became aware of a weird shuffling noise. Like I told you, there are definitely rats down in the basement, but this sounded different than that. This sounded more like footsteps. Sounded like when you were a kid wearing flip-flops and your dad told you to pick your damn feet up. Sounded for all the world like somebody dragging their feet along the ground, and I looked up more than once to see if somebody else was down here. I called out, even got up and walked around the basement to see if I could see anybody, and the lack of anybody to be seen was making my skin crawl. It took me about 2 hours of working in the dark down there, but I finally got it back together. I walked over to the computer, not really expecting it to work, what with the power out, but found that it was still up and running. It told me that everything was operational again, and I turned to leave when I heard the most gut-wrenching scream I'd ever heard. It was like listening to a deer that's gotten caught on a fence. The kind of scream you know is going to lead you to find something that's been gutted. I should have left. I should have left right then and got security, but I had to prove that I was still a tough guy. The boiler room was my domain, and I wasn't about to let some weirdo roll around down there unchallenged. I picked up a wrench from my toolbox, taking a ball-peen hammer in the other hand for good measure. Then I made my way out to see if I could find the source of the noise. As I walked between the furnaces and the boilers, their little pilot lights winking in the gloom, I held the wrench out to defend myself if someone should jump out at me. I didn't expect that they would. I'd searched around down here a few times and found nothing. In my mind, I was just being paranoid. There was nothing down here. It was all just stories that I felt I was too old to believe in anymore. There was no boiler man, no spooks down here to jump out and scare me. And soon, I'd go back upstairs and go to bed and not think about any of it till the next time I had to come down here. When the thing shambled out between two boilers, I thought for sure I was having a hallucination. It looked like one of those things in a Romero movie. Its skin was burnt and broken. Its head was hairless and scabby. Its eyes were white and sightless as they stared off and did nothing. When it turned its head to regard me, I could see that its mouth was open and full of broken teeth. It was wearing the tatters of a uniform, and I could see that it was the same one I'd worn when I first started. There was a name stitched over the breast on the left side, but it was charred. I could barely make it out. When it screamed at me, I turned and ran as the wrench hit the ground. He chased me through that murky blackness for what felt like hours. Being stuck in the stairwell was the worst experience of my life, but this was a close second. I could hear it right behind me, its bare feet slapping at the concrete, and the longer I ran, the more sure I felt that it would get me. No matter how many turns I took amidst all those boilers and water heaters, I never seemed to find the door. It was tireless in its pursuit, and as I ran, I seemed to be looking for the hole that I would trip in. I've seen enough horror movies to know that there's always a hole or a pipe or something to trip on so that the monster can eat you up. Thankfully, it never came. As I rounded a set of units, I saw the stairs in the beam of my flashlight. I almost couldn't believe they were real, and as I tripped my way up them, I could swear the creature was still right on my heels. My feet clanked harshly on the metal steps, shaking the edifice as I climbed it, and when I got to the top, I pushed through the door and turned to slam it behind me. He was 2 or 3 steps back, his feet leaving little red splotches on the grates, and when I slammed the door, he shrieked in fury. I'll remember that hellish chase for the rest of my life, and I know it'll follow me whenever I close my eyes. David was still shaking as he finished telling his story, and I felt sorry for him as I finished up my notes. It really seemed like this place had it in for him. I've been working at this hospital for 29 years. 30 in October, but this is the strangest it's ever been. I don't feel welcome here no more, kid, and I think when the board brings up retirement again this year, I might just take 'em up on it. I'm getting too old for this shit, and I don't think I have another chase like that left in me. He left shortly thereafter, and I asked Carl about it. He just shook his head. The story he told the cops was that a homeless guy had gotten into the basement and must have escaped before they got there. I stuck by it, but I saw the footprints on the stairs. I'm not sure Custodial will ever manage to get them off, and I know Dave will lose it next time he has to go down there and seize them. I got back to work, but I silently thought that retirement might be the best thing for David. Would that we all got to escape the hospital that easily. When Carl came up to the desk, I assumed this was just another middle-of-the-night BS session. He had been stalking around the hospital most of the afternoon, looking for something, but not saying a lot. The fact that he had a couple of the other security guys with him should have tipped me off, but I was a little busy myself that afternoon. We'd had a doctor quit suddenly, and they'd asked me to fix the schedule as I moved the hospitalist schedule around to cover. It sounds pretty important, but my supervisor had done all the work, and I was just reporting the news and changing the spreadsheet around. So far, I'd been cussed at by 3 doctors, had a 4th tell me that they weren't going to show up for their assigned rounds, not my problem, and had another agree, but say that they should have been consulted first. After that, I'd had to call in Team A, the on-call surgical team, for an emergency surgery, something that had taken far longer than it should have. It's amazing how people are happy to cash their overtime checks, but they'll dog cuss you on the phone when you call them in to earn it. Of the 6, I got 5, and the 6th was another case of none of my business. I'd called and left messages, and if they got fired over it, then hey, that had nothing to do with me. It was about 1 a.m., and I was settling in for some YouTube drama with a favorite channel of mine, when Carl came slowly to the desk. The look he had was speculative, but a little worried that he might be on that list of people who were about to lose their jobs. "What's on your mind, Carl?" I asked, when he didn't come right out and say it, instead leaning on the counter like a bird on a wire. "I need to know if you saw somebody come in and leave today, at least since you've been here." My desk was near a major entrance, so my seeing someone wouldn't be outside the realm of possibilities. "Sure, who was it?" "A bald guy, light red scrubs, wearing black leather sandals. He was clean shaven, and his eyes are the clearest blue I've ever seen." I furrowed my brow, thinking over it, but not needing to think too hard. Red scrubs were not a color assigned with any department that I was familiar with, so somebody in any color of red would have stood out. Sandals would have caught my eye too, since the hospital required all employees to wear closed-toed shoes. The man's description would have definitely stood out, and I shook my head, telling him I hadn't seen anyone like that. "Can you come by the office when you get off?" He didn't seem like he wanted me to, but he needed me to see whatever he was seeing. "Sure," I said, feeling a little weird. "What is it, Carl? Usually you're more than happy to tell me what's going on." He didn't seem to know what he just wanted. "I don't want you to go in with expectations, I guess. I want your opinion without you knowing much about it. After you tell me what you think, I'll tell you what I know. Deal?" I nodded, telling him that sounded fine. I had 5 hours to think it over, and by 6 a.m., when my relief staggered in with a yawn and a fresh Starbucks coffee, my curiosity was piqued. I came down to the ER where Carl had his security office. The office was a cramped little room that held one person comfortably and 3 people regularly. How they had gotten those 2 desks inside without building them in there was beyond me, but they took up all the wall space that wasn't the door frame. Even then, you had to turn sideways and shimmy between the edges of the desks, and 2 or 3 more honey buns, and Carl might have to call for the jaws of life some night. The walls were a scrawl of pictures and schedules and memes and random other things, pinned to the 6 huge corkboards that took up 2 walls, the other 2 being plexiglass so the officers on duty could look out into the ER, the epicenter of trouble most nights. One of the desks had an ancient CCTV monitor on it, and that was where I found Carl. "Have a seat," he said, leaning over to open a folder with 5 different videos in it. "What's this about, Carl?" I asked. The last 5 hours had my mind wandering over 100 different scenarios, and I was curious as I had ever been. "Just watch," he told me. "If you recognize the guy, I need to know if he came in, and especially if he left." "Carl, I told you I hadn't—" I know, but I want your honest opinion here. I'm a little freaked out by this guy, and I just want to know what you think of him. I want to know if he's something spooky or not." I got it then. Carl thought the guy might be a spook or something, and he wanted me to take a look and tell him it wasn't so. He wanted me to laugh and say that, that was old so-and-so from whatever department, and call him a goose. He wanted to be sure that this wasn't supernatural, that it was a flesh and blood human, and that it was something he could catch. Even if it was flesh and blood, I wasn't sure he would want to catch it. "Just take a look," Carl said, and started the video before stepping back. It was a scene from the 3rd floor, and I realized it was where the Code Blue had taken place earlier. Code Blues weren't uncommon, but this one had resulted in a death, and it stood out. It was far from the first time I had called a code on someone who died, but it always kind of sticks with you. I tried to remember which room it had been that I had called it for, and when the guy in the red scrubs came out, I realized he was leaving the exact room I was trying to remember. 312's door was closed, but as the man came out, he pulled the door shut behind him and hurried off down the hall. From the moment I saw the guy, I knew something was off. The scrubs he wore looked hand-stitched, the lines standing out on the fabric like an accusation. His head was smooth-looking, and I thought I saw a little gleam as he walked beneath the lights. His face was equally as smooth, and his facial features looked oddly flat, like stickers someone had put on a doll. The whole appearance looked unnatural, but as his eyes looked up at the camera, I found myself trapped by those orbs as they swam in his face. I hadn't wondered how Carl knew that he had blue eyes until I caught sight of them. The CCTV footage was in black and white, but the man's eyes were crystal blue on the monochrome screen. How? I asked, but I couldn't think of how to end it. I suppose the question was still valid, nonetheless. I don't know, Carl said, but I've crawled over the camera footage and I can't figure out how he came into the room. I can't seem to find out when he came into the hospital, or when he left either. Hell, he never even exits the stairwell. I've checked the camera for every floor it connects to, and the roof. The man goes into the stairwell door and just disappears. I rewound the video, watching the strange man come out again, but his exit seemed as unnatural as he was. It was clear that Carl suspected he had something to do with the code blue, but his gait, his appearance, everything about him was so artfully at ease. He wasn't hurrying, wasn't rushing, and seemed to think getting caught was an impossibility. That's not all, though, Carl said, reaching over as he queued up another video. This is from the code blue a couple of days ago, the death on the day shift. This one was a different angle. The bubble lens showed the 4 North hallway and the nurses at their station. It was around noon and the food carts were still moving up and down the hall as lunch was being served. The man stepped out, his image blocked by a food cart for half a second, before he walked up the corridor and had a camera. A moment later, all the nurses were scrambling towards the room he'd walked out of, but it seemed weird that none of them had acknowledged him as he came by. Cashmere Hospital was big, but it was still a down-home hospital. Most everybody got a nod or a wave when they saw someone they knew, but no one had looked up to wave or say hey to this guy. It was almost like they hadn't even seen him. You see, Carl said, he came out and then the code blue came not long after. So, what, you think he's causing the deaths? I asked, wondering why I was here if Carl suspected that the guy had injected them with something or smothered them with a pillow or something like that. That's just it, Carl said exasperatedly. All the deaths are completely natural. The one today was from a heart attack, and the one on 4 North was a lung infection. The tech didn't report any weird needle marks or anything, and both of the patients were dead when the nurses arrived. That's why I was sort of hoping this was spooky in nature or something. Maybe he's stealing their life force or drinking their blood or something like that, he asked, almost hopefully. I only shrugged. I have no clue, Carl. If he's a vampire, then that would be a first, and I've never seen a ghost hurt people in here. Hell, even Shaky Leg Mary mostly just scares people and lets them hurt themselves. Carl sat back heavily, and I could tell he was hoping for an easy explanation. Well, not an easy explanation, I guess, but we had all gotten a little used to the excuse of hospital is spooky whenever weird things happened. The answer here seemed to be that there was a weirdo who showed up and either killed people or stayed with them as they died. Then, how's he getting out without being seen? Carl asked, clinging to hope. Who knows, I said. How did that copy of Carol get out without anyone seeing her? How did David disappear into the stairwell for 3 days? Who's to say this guy isn't stuck in the stairwell too? Who's to say he didn't come from the stairwell in the first place? I really don't know, Carl. Could be something, could be nothing. Carl looked like he wanted to cry, but his face was refusing to open the floodgates. He'd been counting on me to give him an easy answer, and barring that, he knew he was going to have to do some digging. Whether it was a ghost or not, it was still killing patients, and in Cashmere Hospital, the management only took notice when whatever it was threatened them or their revenue. Looks like I got some detective work to do. That was about 2 weeks ago. Carl is no closer to finding the man in the red scrubs than he was when he asked me to come to his office. The rumor around the hospitals are that he doesn't leave his office much these days. The day security reports that They can't use the small space because Carl's in there at all hours, running through security footage. He's pulled records on all the deaths within the last few months and has asked the local police to get an autopsy on the 2 who died recently. He has friends in the sheriff's office, or this request would have likely been met with derision. People come to me with these things, knowing that Carl and I are friends, but I don't have answers for them either. He may not have a lot of answers, but he does have more evidence. I found him on the cameras 2 more times, Carl said, sounding downright gleeful as he leaned against my desk. I'm trying to get permission to access the camera archives so I can go back further. The ones I have access to only go back about 6 months. He's been at 2 other Fatal Code Blues, and when I showed it to a buddy of mine who's a detective, he says that's a definite pattern. I was glad that Carl was making headway, but it appeared that he had done nothing but look for this guy since Monday. The underarms of his uniform were concernedly dark, and some of the stains looked old and smeary. There was a smell about him that led me to believe that he might not have been showering regularly either. That's some solid progress, Carl. Any clue where he's disappearing to? His face fell a little then, but he wouldn't be derailed. No, but I'm not sure he's leaving the hospital at all. We can't find any sign of him leaving the stairwell once he enters, and I think he might be getting onto the roof somehow without triggering the alarm. Someone came in through the front door, but as they caught sight of Carl, they turned and headed for the elevators. I couldn't say I could blame them either. Despite looking like a homeless security guard and smelling like a fast food dumpster, Carl just had this presence now, something he hadn't had on Monday when he decided to do his research. It was hard to pin down, at least it would be for normal people, but he reminded me of the mental patients he sometimes saw walking the halls. He had a manic gleam in his eye, a mania that seemed to have taken hold of him, and I was worried that he might become yet another odd presence for the hospital to use in its strange designs. Watching him go through it was more horrific than any manifestation the hospital had thrown my way yet, made worse because Carl was a friend. Carl, maybe it's best to kick this up the line to the cops. If this guy is killing people, then maybe it's best to let the professionals handle it. Carl looked at me like he didn't quite understand me for a second, some of his sanity trying to claw back up before his obsession took hold again. I gotta get back to it, he said, shuffling off like a lost child. I'll see you later. As he left, I felt dread building in me. Much like Danny Torrance, it was frightening to watch someone you respected transform before your eyes into someone you don't recognize. I would have to watch him closely, lest the hospital claim yet another victim. I swear to God, you can see it for yourself if you don't believe me. I looked up from my pancakes to see that Matt was wearing his dead serious look. All of us were sitting at the Taste of Cashmere, a diner that sat across the street from the hospital, and Matt was talking about his latest run-in with weirdness. Me, Matt, David, and Carl had taken to eating there some mornings, especially if the night had been particularly bad, and the food was well worth the price. Carl nodded sagely, chewing his eggs before saying, I told you, she jumps every night at 3:18. I've watched her do it a dozen times or more, but none of you believed me. Wasn't so much that none of us believed Carl when he told us about the jumping girl. It was more that he had told us so often, we no longer cared. Cashmere had so many weird things going on that one more was just icing on the cake. I never said I didn't believe you, Matt said. I didn't know it was like that. Matt had come to talk to me after it happened, and the story had been grisly. Matt had been on a break, walking down the South Promenade, the newer part of the hospital, to get coffee. Now, there was a cafeteria on the north end, where we worked, but he claimed that the coffee they brewed on the South Promenade canteen was better by a mile. Matt often made the trip when he had enough quarters to feed the fancy machine they'd set up over there, and today he was in quarters. He'd gotten his coffee and was on his way back when he had to cross the big entryway that looked up onto the other balconies that fronted on the other floors. This was the first thing most guests saw when they came to the front doors, and some people had called it the ballroom because of the large glass chandelier and the polished tile floor. To me, it always looked like the reception area of a fancy hotel, with the desk and the elevators and the glass balconies sitting behind it. It was about 3:15 when Matt started making his way back towards the switchboard, and he just so happened to be crossing the ballroom at 3:18. He just so happened to be looking up at the balconies as he crossed the ballroom, and that was the only reason he had seen her at all. Something caught my eye, and when I looked up, she was perched on the railing of the 5th floor. Her feet were bare, her white legs kicking out over empty air as she looked down at me. I started to call to her to ask her what she was doing, but when she pushed off the rail and began to freefall, she screamed. Her cries shook the chandelier, and when she hit the floor, I dropped my coffee and started backpedaling. I couldn't believe it. She'd hit the ground and popped like an overripe melon, and her blood had splattered across the tiles as she hit. I stopped backing up when I hit the wall, and as I stood there hyperventilating, she turned her head and gurgled wetly at me. I think she might have said "Mama," but I can't be sure. I closed my eyes, trying to get control of myself so I could call it in, but when I opened them, the only thing spilled on the tile was my coffee. She was gone. She was nowhere to be seen, and I just stood there and stared at my spilled coffee for about 5 minutes. When my legs finally decided to work again, I came to tell you, he said, nodding at me. The coffee cup in his hand had shook a little as he spoke, and I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Watching Barbara Flatsby tumble to the polished floor of the South Promenade would have been enough to make anyone spill their coffee. Barbara Flatsby, if the stories were to be believed, was one of the newer ghosts to take up residence in Cashmere Hospital. The South Promenade had been up for less than a year when she had thrown herself from the 5th floor balcony and landed hard enough to crack 5 of the tiles in the pristine entryway. She was a single mother, also newly single. Her boyfriend had left her after he'd heard the news of her pregnancy, and she had tragically lost her baby in childbirth. Truth be told, the stories claim that it had likely been dead for days, and Barbara was in denial. There were OB nurses who swore they had taken part in the delivery, and the baby had been cold and unresponsive from the first exposed extremity. Barbara had been unwilling to hear this, and had insisted on cradling the baby as she lay sobbing in her hospital bed. After the nurses had insisted that the baby had to be disposed of, the corpse beginning to fall apart under her care, Barbara had become something akin to catatonic. She'd been unresponsive for nearly a week, her room changing from the OB floor to the short-stay unit within days of the birth. Her parents came to see her, her friends came to see her, but she would not respond to any of them. She mostly sat in her misery. That was until she had gotten up at 3 a.m. one morning and decided to fling herself off the 5th floor balcony. Her death had been classified as the actions of a heartbroken mother, and there was even a plaque erected in the lobby in her memory. The plaque, however, was hardly necessary. Barbara repeated her show every night at 3:18 for whoever just happened to be in the lobby. All kinds of staff had claimed to have seen her, but they say it was something you didn't quite believe until you saw it for yourself. "It's pretty awful," said David, munching his hash browns and giving a little shudder. "Wait," I asked, "do you mean all of you have seen this girl?" "Yup," David said. "Couple of times," said Carl. "Once too many so far," Matt said. As I ate, I felt a little left out. Everyone else had seen this ghost girl except for me. If I was going to add her to my book, something I was pretty sure I was going to do, I needed to experience it for myself. As we ate, I made a decision to go on one of my days off, to see the phenomenon for myself. My next day off was Thursday, so Friday morning, I got up at about 1:30 and made my way to the hospital. I avoided the desk, not wanting to field any questions from Clint as to why I was here on my night off, and made my way to the South Promenade. I could take a seat in the lobby and observe her as she fell from the railing. That would give me a great means of explaining it in my book, but as I came to the entrance area, I was in for a disappointment. The floor gleamed wetly with fresh polish, and the ropes hung across it read, "Closed to the public." I could still have seen the fall from beyond the ropes, but I moved around towards the elevator, looking for a better vantage point, and I had a better idea. Why not go up to the 5th floor and watch the start of her fall? I wondered if it would work as I took the elevator up. Barbara fell from the balcony every night at about 3:18. Surely my presence wouldn't be enough to stop her. She had fallen with people standing in the lobby. I had to believe that she would fall with me sitting up there, too. It was the act of falling that was important, and she probably wouldn't even acknowledge me. She was a spirit with a predetermined destination, and I doubted she'd be stopped by someone as mundane as me. It was 3 o'clock when I took a seat behind the railing, and I sat making notes on my phone as I waited. I was excited. It was a little spooky. I felt proud of myself for doing actual field work. I also felt a little silly as I waited up here for something I didn't actually think would happen. My head was swirling with different emotions as time ticked by. The jumping girl was a big part of hospital history, even if it was one of the newer parts. It would be a travesty not to include it, but as I typed up some simple entries, I felt sure I'd be disappointed. This would be the one night she wouldn't show, and I would have to rely on first-hand accounts to detail the experience. Things like this didn't just happen on set schedules, and no amount of waiting would make it so. Sitting here was like waiting for a particularly scary roller coaster, and I hoped that the experience would live up to the hype. "Are you waiting for someone?" I glanced up, startled out of my contemplation, and there she was. She was sitting on the rail, her legs dangling out into open space. Her hospital gown was long and green, her blonde hair spilling down the back of it, just above her buttocks. She looked so incredibly young. None of the stories ever mentioned her age, and I could believe she was a high school girl or someone's kid sister. She started forward, looking down to the scene of her death, and I became aware that I could see the chain for the chandelier through her if I concentrated hard enough. Seeing her here was like catching Santa Claus putting presents under the tree. You believe he's real, but you're still so surprised to actually see him. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" I wet my lips as I tried to make words. "I suppose I was waiting for you." "For me?" she asked, her eyes turning merry as she looked back over her shoulder at me. "Why would you be waiting for me?" Even as she asked, her eyes turned down to the lobby below, the place she would always wind up when it all came down to it. I guess I just wanted to know. I paused, trying to think of something to ask her. "Why do you come back here every night?" She looked back over her shoulder a final time, and her answer seemed so obvious. "Why, the view. It's so pretty. I seem to be drawn to it." Her eyes turned down to the tiles, and I thought for sure she would jump now. Looking at the clock on my phone, however, I saw that it was only 3:15. 3 minutes to go. "I remember coming up here before Anthony was born. I walked up the stairs, trying to get him to come out, and when I reached the top, I looked over the rail and saw the floor below. The patterns, the way the light hits it. It's like a dream. I think I came up here so I could see Anthony again, like maybe he'd be waiting for me down there in those tiles and lights." 3:16. 2 minutes left. I wanted to show him those lights and those tiles so badly, but now he'll never see them. He's gone beyond them, beyond me, and I'll never get to hold my baby boy.
and show him there's beauty in the world. 3:17, 1 minute and counting. I got up and took a step towards her, wanting to stop her. I wanted to pull her back. I wanted to show her that there could be life after her son, but I was too late for that. She'd jump either way, would have jumped 5 years ago, no matter what I did, and the realization stopped me. I was stuck, trapped about 5 feet from her, and about 5 years too late to help her. That's when she pushed off from the railing. I thought she might simply fly away for a moment. Her gown fluttered behind her, her hair bouncing in the sudden breeze, before she fell like a stone and went screaming all the way down. I ran to the rail, but it was too late. I was saved from the show that Matt had witnessed and found only an empty lobby below. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it all. The lights and the tiles twinkled merrily, and I had to admit she was right. It was a very pretty view. As I headed for the elevator that would take me back to my car, I knew she would continue to return here, again and again and again. Cashmere Hospital traps its flies, both living and dead, and if we're lucky, it only lets us die once. If we aren't, well, come to the South Promenade lobby at 3:18 if you want to see how that goes. Sometimes it's better to be dead than in whatever hell has trapped poor Barbara.